here with President Frank Flynn from the Rhode Island Federation of Teachers and Health Professionals. And today the Providence Teachers Union is going to send a request to NIOSH, which is the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. And we're going to ask that they do a health and safety inspection, an actual inspection of the Providence Public Schools based on the walkthrough results from both the Providence Teachers Union building delegates and the results that the district has put forth in the press. We're asking for these because we don't believe, based on what we received for results from our delegates and what we've heard from our teachers as a result of what was put in the press yesterday, that what we are seeing in our schools in actuality on a daily basis is what was put in the walkthrough results that were done by the governor's teams. So in order to have an unbiased opinion, we're asking for the national NIOSH to come in, hopefully, and do a thorough investigation of our schools. Because we know more than anything else that our working conditions, teachers' working conditions, are students' learning conditions. And it is important, imperative, it's our moral imperative to be sure that our schools are as safe as possible when our students return to teaching and learning as soon as October 13th. The more students we're going to be having in our schools, the more likely it is that we're going to be threatening transmission of COVID-19. So in order to ensure as safe as possible return to our schools, we need to ensure that they are up to specifications from CDC guidelines, we have the appropriate ventilation, and that they are definitely PPE ready and hygienic enough for students to exist in. And by hygienic, I don't mean reasonable dinginess. So unfortunately, it had to come to this because we've been asking to be a part of this process since the governor asked for this investigation, which started out as an investigation and moved to walkthrough. We wanted to be part of the walks. We were told no, we needed to trust the process. We weren't there to do investigations because we're not engineers. We're certainly not HVAC people. We just wanted to be able to verify that these walks were in fact happening. We were told no. In fact, the media and the press were told no, that they could not go on the walks. So that led us to question why. Why no transparency? Why weren't parents allowed, or community folks, or even students allowed to be on these so-called walkthroughs? And then when we read the results of the walkthroughs, it became abundantly clear that the walkthroughs, with a simple circle of yes, no, or in progress, had absolutely no matrix with which to go by to show whether or not there was a way in which to show a school was ready or not ready. So as teachers, when we score kids or grade kids, we utilize a rubric. We are transparent with our students in terms of grading. They know how they're going to be graded. They know what the expectations are. So when you utilize a circle or checklist such as that, it would be helpful to know how many yeses or how many nos and what the weighting is of each of the items on that list, which would determine whether or not a school is deemed ready or healthy enough for our children and our staff to return to. There is no matrix, there is no rubric. This was a pro forma activity to basically get unions to stop asking questions about the health and safety of schools. On Friday evening, I asked the superintendent to send me a copy of all of the rubrics or all of the checklists from Providence Public Schools because every other superintendent across the state was sharing theirs with union presidents, and I received no response. We put out a press release regarding this press conference today and regarding this action that we were taking, and shortly after, all of the things that I had asked for end up in the Providence Journal or on WPRI for the public to see. Now, while I appreciate the sudden urgency for transparency at the 11th hour on a Sunday from the district, I would have preferred it weeks ago when we had asked for it, so that we could have worked together to ensure that there were actual action items that we could have done to prepare for the opening of schools. With that said, this is only the tip of the iceberg, ensuring the safety and security of our students. This is also only the tip of the iceberg in that once we get in our schools, our other concern is what is happening when they're there in terms of virtual learning academy and what that looks like, the number of students that they're giving to particular teachers, having 52 students on a roster at elementary level and upwards of 200 students on a roster at the secondary level. That is neither academically, pedagogically, or morally sound. So while the safety and security of the buildings is important, the academic achievement and success of our students is equally important. And we will be addressing that shortly as well. Does anyone have any questions?
Can you explain what people would see should these inspections happen?
Yes, I believe that they'll see that in one inspection, a teacher posted online shortly after they were posted yesterday that her school's HVAC system was noted as being ready to go, and she had posted that the date of the inspection, the HVAC system was broken, not working, and it had in fact spilled into her classroom, and she had a picture of it beside the checklist.
So people will be coming in. What can you just explain the relationship you have?
The relationship.
Just what else would be happening? Would this take? I saw it over the course of 7 months.
So I don't believe that that these walkthroughs took any amount of time whatsoever. I believe that they happened within 20 minutes. I believe that it was reported in one school that 40 classrooms took 25 minutes.
They didn't go into every classroom.
Yeah, they didn't go into every classroom. I received an email yesterday from a teacher who said that her principal didn't take them to her classroom specifically because it wasn't set up. I can tell you that they didn't go into my classroom because I have tape on the windows that shows which windows in my classroom work and which ones don't, and they weren't fixed. So clearly, this was more like a drive-by than a walkthrough. Walkthroughs are more thorough. If you do an academic walkthrough, you go into the classroom, you do assessments, you actually talk to people, and then you provide feedback. The feedback is one sentence on the last page from some, not all, and it's just negligent.
President, I've talked to a few of the people who conducted these walkthroughs off record. One thing that they're finding is that it's many of the buildings that, especially here in Providence, there are fundamental issues that will take rebuilding the school possibly from the inside out. For example, the HVAC systems that would require a value of 13, or a value of 13
Yep.
to be standard now. They simply can't be powered by the infrastructure, the electrical infrastructure of the building. So how many of the challenges that you're seeking to identify are more micro versus macro, and what would satisfy you and the union in terms of getting the buildings back open sometime the foreseeable future?
So we're not so foolish as to think that a building built in 1929 or even 1960 or 70 would miraculously be up to code. We're not so foolish as to think that a MERV system of 13 or 6 even would be brought up to 13, right? We know how much money that costs, but we also know that they've had since March 13th to go in and address fundamental cleaning. And so waxing over rodent feces, to me, is not fundamental cleaning, okay? And so that doesn't even address reasonable dinginess. And so at the very least, at the very bare minimum, we would have expected that these classrooms would have been at least bare minimum ready, and they were not. That said, there are also other things that could have been done for our buildings that are older. So there are ionization fans that could have been purchased. There were also things that required absolute emergency care immediately that could have started in April, May, June, July, or August, that could have been done by Aramark, that could have been used the CARES money. There's $50 million that apparently no one asked for, but apparently no one was given the documentation to ask for until August 27th. Those are the governor's words, not mine. Okay, the governor said that money was not asked for. Well, given that Providence is under state control, she is the governor of the state of Rhode Island. She stands next to the commissioner who has the control. You would think that they would have a conversation about $50 million being hanging out there to be utilized. Some of that money should have been utilized to take care of $10,000 items, $15,000 items. $50 million is a lot of money to take care of some of that stuff. I'm not saying all of it. I'm not saying we're replacing HVAC systems in large buildings like Col G. Loro. But what I'm saying is, what we do is we find out how much ionization fans cost in buildings that were built in 1929 and don't have HVAC systems, like my building, or like, you know, our twin building, which is either Roger Williams, or triplet building, which is Gilbert Stewart. And we take that CARES money and we utilize that. But to say flippantly that $50 million is sitting there and nobody bothered to use it, when you're in charge of the state and you stand next to the person who is running, who took over Providence schools, you have conversations on a daily basis about the way the schools are in terms of physical plant, and you haven't thought to utilize that money to the best of your ability to ensure the safety and security of our children and our teachers, that's not on the teachers. That's on them. And again, we're not asking for the Taj Mahal, but we are asking for at least as safe as possible. And as safe as possible with $50 million sitting in a bank somewhere is not a $5 box fan.
So this request has been filed. What happens from here forward?
Well, as always, Providence teachers showed up for work today, right? And they're doing their very best. They're in classrooms. We all have our masks on. We have our children socially distanced to the extent possible, which is in the regulations that the district has put forth. Some classrooms do not allow for the extent possible. I personally teach in a room that used to be a custodian's closet. There's no to the extent possible in my classroom. There are other teachers who have put on Facebook and social media, the extent possible is not possible in their rooms. We're doing the best that we can under the circumstances. What happens is we hope that NIOSH takes up the complaint. We hope that either the commissioner or the superintendent engages the state and asks for some of that $50 million to do the things that need to be done in the immediate to make the classrooms and the buildings safer than they currently are. To unscrew the windows that are broken and actually fix the windows. Take the screws out, because they've screwed them shut now, instead of fixing them. Take the screws out, fix the windows, so we can open the windows. And then when November comes, I don't know what we're going to do, because we're not, well, we may be in November, but hoping that we have a winter similar to last year, but we don't know. We have to be reasonable. But we want to work with people. We don't want to work against people. But when people don't respond to my emails, how is that working collaboratively?
Who hasn't responded to your emails?
Well, like I said, I sent the superintendent an email asking for the documentation from the walkthroughs. I never got a response. And back on April 30th, when I sent the superintendent and the commissioner an email asking to be a part of the planning process for reopening, I never got a response. I got a phone call from the superintendent saying yes, and then the next time I heard from him was when the plan was finished and I was asked for feedback. That to me is not collaboration. That's not how collaboration works. I'm not asking for carte blanche to say yes or no, thumbs up or thumbs down. We're asking, we have good ideas. I have teachers who are brilliant. We're asking to be part of the solution. This didn't have to come to this. It's just that simple. I've collaborated with every other superintendent that we've had, and Steve Smith before me. And they will attest to that. If you ask Superintendent Marr, if you ask Superintendent Lucy, if you ask Tom Brady, this is the first time in my presidency and vice presidency that I have not collaborated or have not been invited to collaborate with a leadership team.
Have you gotten a response from the agency? When did you send, like, when did you file this petition?
No, that was being filed today, so it's going today, yeah.
Okay. And I know you described it as, the first federal request. Have you know of any school districts doing that? I mean, just here locally, this is the first.
No, we don't know of anyone that's ever done this.
When Bristol Warren, they filed suit and
Yep.
that went down initially. I think you guys were supposed to be involved and then you pulled back. Do
We
you
were.
plan on going further with any sort of action?
Not at this point. We're going to do this right now. We only pulled back because I didn't feel like I was prepared enough. I had a lot of stuff going on on my plate. Remember, we're negotiating as well. So between negotiating, getting ready to open schools, I didn't feel like I was prepared enough. So that's the only reason why we didn't sign on. Any other questions?
Just to follow up with your earlier question about the condition of schools, it shouldn't have taken a pandemic to shed a light on how badly some of our public buildings are, and particularly our schools. We know that over the last several years there's been a concerted effort to try to improve them. We passed a $250 million bond. That was a good down payment. But this should be a clarion call to everyone that we need to do more to protect the health and safety of our students and the adults that work in our buildings. I came here to this school actually in 1959 as a kindergartner. I grew up on that street across the street, and this was an old building then, and it's 61 years later, and it's not improved. So there are so many examples throughout the state, and it just happens to be Providence particularly right now, but this is not new to just Providence Public Schools. This is many of our urban cities that have old buildings that have been neglected. And I just want to say that we can't put any fault on the custodians. They're working really hard, but what they're dealing with is many decades of wear and tear, and it's difficult for them. And they have no choice sometimes but to screw the windows, because if not, they would fall out or kids would get hurt. So it's not a reflection on the people that are trying to do the right thing. It's just that the buildings are old. We need, as a society, we need to make this a priority and a focus to make sure that we attend to all of our buildings and make sure they're safe and healthy for all of our students.
Yeah, I agree with Frank. I'm not casting aspersions on our custodians. They have worked tirelessly this summer. My issue is with Aramark and their idea of reasonable dinginess. The fact that you would even have that as a way to clean a building, or an option to clean a building, is disturbing on so many levels. The fact that they're not held accountable by the people who signed contracts with them is absurd. I know that every time you turn around, teachers are being held accountable, right? We're being held accountable for test scores. We're being held accountable. We did this wrong. We did that wrong. Fine. Our principals are being held accountable. Our principals worked all summer. Our guidance counselors, I can't even tell you what they've been through in the past 3 weeks. Why isn't anyone holding Aramark, the big company Aramark, accountable for what's not happening in schools? And why aren't we holding the city accountable for the fact that all work stopped and nothing happened this summer when nobody's in the buildings? We had work orders in. We have grievances that have been filed that no work was done. It just makes no sense. Holes still in roofs. They took out a fan in the teacher's classroom and bore a hole in the other side of the wall, left both holes. That's at Gregorian School. How is that possible? That is okay? And how is it not done in June, July, and August? These things make no sense. But it's not about the people who are doing the boots on the ground work. This is about company, corporation, and city leadership and state leadership not doing what they're supposed to do.